Welcome to Odyssey. Odyssey is a show where we discuss the frontier of crypto's opportunities and challenges in driving real-world impact in the societies of tomorrow. Odyssey is produced thanks to the support of Safe and Ambire Wallet. Safe is the most trusted decentralized custody protocol and collective asset management platform on Ethereum and the EVM. Ambire Wallet is an advanced smart wallet that utilizes account abstraction, acting as a gateway to web3 applications and providing users with secure and effortless management of their digital assets. You'll hear more about them later on in the show. Let's get to it, friends. Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Odyssey. On this podcast, we have Stani, who is the founder of Lens and Aave. In this conversation, we explore Stani's crypto journey, the origins of Aave, formerly known as ETHLend back in 2017. We discuss where DeFi has the opportunity to continue to expand and grow access for people around the world, what Stani's excited for in this realm. We then pivot and discuss Lens and his thesis on decentralized social, why our relationship with our current social networks is fundamentally broken, and then most interestingly, we discuss where these two intersect. Throughout this conversation, Stani and I discuss this idea of trust networks, which is really where we can meet people's need for connection and also the capacity to transact financial value. Overall, I just thought this conversation was really fascinating because oftentimes I feel that we either speak to the decentralized finance side of the conversation or the decentralized social conversation. And actually being able to bring these two together and have a really robust conversation around that was really fruitful. Without further ado, though, I present to you Stani Kulechov.
Thank you, Marcus. And it's been amazing to follow your podcast journey. Especially, I've been following you for, I think, since the beginning on Lens. So it's definitely nice that I also am one of the guests now. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been great to kind of navigate the whole Lens ecosystem, and I'm really excited to dive into that throughout this conversation as well, and kind of your thesis there too. But let's start off with a little bit of your personal background, Stani. You know, how did you get into this crazy world of crypto? You've been an OG from some of the earlier days of Ethereum, and this whole ecosystem that's really flourished has been as a consequence of a lot of the work you've done. So would love to kind of hear a little bit of your crypto story and share that with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I came to the crypto space more from like personal interest in thinking about like how we can create new financial applications. I was still studying in university, but I was super actively looking into the Ethereum subreddits and reading a lot of interesting discussions of what kind of things could be built. Actually, Ethereum Foundation, they had a lot of good videos back in the days in YouTube as well, where they explained quite well what Ethereum does and what are the different kinds of applications. And I watched the early DevCon videos as well, and it was just such an amazing and eye-opening experience because you kind of have this new way of rebuilding the internet and different kinds of use cases that it could provide. And also, like, what ties everything together is the aspect of governance, that we actually don't have a central authority that is creating these applications or governing, whether it's a government or a business, but instead it's a group of community users and people who care about these networks. And pretty much at some point, I was building fintech applications before crypto, so finance was quite something where I was interested in, and mainly from the perspective of providing and bringing access. So I grew up on the internet, meaning that when I was very little, the information I had is through, let's say, TV, libraries, your parents, friends, and also that kind of those kind of like channels. And what the internet actually did, it really opened the way of accessing information. So I was able to, as many of people in my age and above, was able to find things that in your own kind of like demand what you wanted to learn. And this was super exciting because you could find things what people were writing in different parts of the world very recently. And I found this kind of like access to information fascinating. And then obviously when businesses started to come into the online environment, you had more distribution. You could buy anything. I was ordering books from Amazon and eBay and waiting for a couple of months them to arrive back to Finland, where I was growing up. And obviously, like the financial layer came with PayPal and Stripe, and it was safe to put a credit card online. So for me, there was kind of this idea of we actually can build a financial infrastructure that is same to everyone. So it doesn't really look into your backgrounds or your beliefs, and offers you the exact same function in a neutral way wherever you are located in. And that's like a very big financial empowerment. And this going towards that direction, I started to experiment a bit more with smart contracts, and we created the first version what Aave is today, called ETH, short for Ethereum lending, effectively where you can earn on your assets, but also you can unlock value of your cryptographic net worth as well. And that's like kind of like a pivotal point where in 2017, I decided that this could actually now be something I could fully focus upon. And I dropped out of college and came back and then wanted to graduate. So I finished my education, which I think was important for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that story. And, I guess growing up in Finland and you saw the development and entrance of, new financial products coming in. And I always think that like whenever you're in, an environment, say Latin America is particularly salient, where you have a lot of financial products that like oftentimes never make it. To this day, we still don't have PayPal, for example, in Guatemala. So the necessity for permissionless, governance minimized financial rails is super crucial. And so great to hear that was a little bit of kind of the exploration. And given, 2017, DeFi was not even a term back then. What was the kind of reception of ETHLend and kind of how were people relating to this new concept that you were bringing to the table that was, hey, you can borrow and lend Ether? And how was that received? And how has that like evolved over the course of you've seen, DeFi summer roll around, and really we're at the state where every day there's like a new protocol being launched. And back then what you were proposing was like very novel and really exciting. So what is that sort of arc of DeFi matured, and how have you seen that develop?
Yeah, I mean, we've built ETHLend kind of like back in the day before there was a community. So the community kind of like came as in the sense of from interest and what we were building. And the first perception of what we built, I think it wasn't received very well, to be honest. There's a couple of reasons. One was that for the Ethereum ecosystem, it was very difficult to kind of like understand, like, well, why would you borrow against your Ether, because you could sell it, and explaining that, well, from the economics perspective, you don't want to sell something that you have ownership, but you want to use that value that the object has, which is becoming even more important because we're transitioning more from Christina from our team, who's leading the growth and doing a lot of work with the creators, especially on the music creators. She has this term called like we're living in a rent internet and we're moving towards like a ownership internet. So in the future, we just own more than things we own today. So generally, you might some population own a house, might own a car, might own clothes, furniture, But in the future, we're gonna all own part of the networks and things we're using on a daily basis. So internet is gonna be more fair and equal in that sense. So that's why like the vision of Aave and back in those days in ETHLend was very important for unlocking that value that we have through ownership. And the second thing why people didn't get what we were building was that to actually create a transaction, you had I think 10 or 15 steps to go. You first create like a smart contract vault, and once that is done, you set the terms, and then you supply the collateral, and then was this order matching. So it was very proof of concept of what it could be, the vision. So that was kind of where we were sailing at that point. But over time, there was more and more people and community members that actually then contributed and guided as well, and with user feedback, what direction we should build, and that was significantly helpful for us to navigate.
As always, community engagement and participation, super crucial in the space, obviously. And I'm curious because you put out a tweet the other day, a couple of weeks ago, that was sort of speaking to the future of DeFi, and we're certainly going to get into Lens and all the amazing work you're doing there. But before pivoting to that, would love your take on what are you seeing on the horizon of DeFi? What's really piqued your interest, and what are you seeing builders really focus on these days?
Yeah, I think looking past, especially what we have been building in the ecosystem and DeFi in general, I've noticed that we're filling a lot of the infrastructural gaps. So, for example, as of today, we have quite seamless way to, for example, transact value without giving custody and having full transparency, and also like having smart contract based execution, which means to me that we have a system that is automated and no one can arbitrarily change those systems. Way of actually unlocking value of things that you own across Web3 space, and being able to earn on your assets, and also having a stable value as well on chain, and countless of other things in DeFi space. But what is interesting here is that we were able to create a very programmatic, or let's say programmable finance as an infrastructure, like a baseline infrastructure that is here now. And it's similar infrastructure exists in traditional finance. It just isn't as good as it's in DeFi. And I think DeFi is different because you have this full transparency, public blockchains, smart contract execution, so guaranteeing exactly what the contracts are doing, and you can interact with peer-to-contract instead of necessarily peer-to-peer and peer-to entities and service providers. And most importantly, all these decentralized protocols and usually the DeFi protocols that capture most of the value, they're quite highly decentralized. They're governed by the communities. So people with different kinds of backgrounds come together and actually decide what could be interesting to build in the future, or how risk parameters or interest rate curves should be changed. And I think that's super exciting because it means that anyone can actually come and enter into the system in a permissionless way and contribute to, let's say, to discussion forums, vote on different proposals, and actually seek for delegations. So you don't have to actually own any of the network, and you get delegations and create impact. And for future DeFi, I think now that we have this baseline as a public good, it's functional, and these protocols are maturing down the line. Now is actually a good time to take a couple of steps and start to think further, and start to think about like what could be that actually the front end of DeFi could look like, and when we can actually leverage the infrastructure we have and empower regionally, but also like in a global scale with decentralized finance. And that's where we are going to enter into a period where we're going to focus more on what is the experience should look like and function on a place where you want to transact in real life or across the internet. We're still using mostly the traditional financial networks, payment networks online, which operate like black boxes, essentially. And we have this incredible technology that we could shift, but we have the infrastructure. Now we have to build the experiences and fill those use cases and find the value why someone will switch from current networks to the new ones.
Yeah, I love that. And the mention of like a front end being sort of a really big missing factor, I think is super crucial, right? We already have through decentralized finance, like financial infrastructure that is able to allow anyone around the world to transact value freely and internationally without any barriers, at least theoretically, right? But there are user experience barriers that are substantial. So as you think about sort of a more global adoption of decentralized finance that isn't just relegated to those who can, navigate what was initially, 12 different steps and having to sign 12 different things and now is reduced significantly. Like on the front end side and on the real world adoption and utility side, like what are you seeing emerge in the ecosystem, and perhaps like how is Aave looking to position itself to capture some of that opportunity?
I personally would love to see more activity on building trust networks in a way where they kind of like follow this typology where you might have like a bigger trusted entities that have some sort of a delegated credit. And then from those trusted entities, you have distribution of the credit to regional areas. I think especially decentralized stablecoins are an interesting position to do that because, and in DeFi in general, because you could actually create those networks on top of the existing DeFi ecosystem. And if we could do that, what it helps is that we could actually provide liquidity across globally. So we have a liquidity machine that could be actually deployed regionally and creates competitive pricing to entities and sub entities where, let's say that they can be actually DAOs, to be honest. They can be like a larger capital allocation, credit allocation DAOs that are allocating in more sub levels regionally and using some new methods of actually assessing credit and the credit risk. And the end result here is that we're able to actually increase the access to finance and maybe even I would see kind of like a starting point to be on funding infrastructure. I think infrastructure is a very interesting concept because public infrastructure isn't necessarily public good in the sense that what we think about it is in Web3, but it's something that actually enables a lot of things in many countries. So I think that's where we should kind of like get experimentations and see how we can create more empowerment there. And that's my vision where we could see credit networks evolve. And obviously, then I would personally like to see like how these credit DAOs will manage not only credit risk but also thinking about where credit should actually exist. Because the interesting thing about credit and debt is that it can be empowering and it can enable a lot of things, but at the same time, it can actually create issues. That's what we're facing now in the global economy.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I myself have, used some of these protocols that rely more on trust assumptions, particularly, some of these under collateralized lending protocols, and had personal experiences where you end up getting burnt by the fact that so and so defaults on their debt, and what you thought was previously a trusted entity turns out not to be so trusted. And this is something that we saw just more broadly across the ecosystem over kind of the last year, and luckily have flushed a lot of that out. But I think a lot of people, as they look back, they think, well, to what extent can we really rely on these trust mechanisms to issue, say, something like an under collateralized loan? But I definitely think Aave's credit delegation will play a really important role, and I think is part of this kind of foundational infrastructure. And personally super bullish on, okay, how can we sort of unlock more opportunity and abundance through credit, right? Because I think the notion that everyone will use a over collateralized loan is a fallacy if we really want to scale this to as many people as possible. So I made a whole little kind of video series on how I bought a car with DeFi, for example, and that was a really fascinating experience. But the reality was it was still like a collateralized debt position. So it wasn't that it was totally, that's not a reality for your everyday person. But had I been able to say, oh, hey, I trust you, and therefore you can get this like really low interest rate loan, which compared to TradFi is just like orders of magnitude at times better. That's what I'm super, super pumped by, and excited to see where Aave continues to build with that, and what continues to expand in that world.
Well, also in terms of the Aave protocol, there's a feature called credit delegation,
Yeah.
which enables anyone who is supplying liquidity to delegate their borrowing power to someone else. And roughly 70% of the suppliers, they're not exercising any borrow. So it creates an interesting opportunity for suppliers to actually subscribe to this kind of like a trust network or fund a credit DAO. So that's interesting. I have seen a couple of iterations. Someone's using it and some hackathon iterations. But I think we just really need more builders that are thinking about that. Like that beyond over collateralized aspect and thinking like, okay, how we actually build the next layer for DeFi sourced liquidity that has that trust component, and how we manage the trust. I think that is still a bit missing.
So what do you think is missing there? Because I feel sometimes people have this resistance when we start to mention the word trust, and particularly say with like, again, under collateralized lending, it's like, well, this is where things start to get a little bit messy, and humans aren't necessarily, we can't necessarily trust, like humans have this inner incentive that can't necessarily be trusted. So I guess on the infrastructure side or to the technology side, like what do you feel is missing to really expand these trust networks?
Yeah, I think people don't like changes, and also things that are new to them. And even though, like for example, the trust concept, it actually exists um, quite heavily as well in Web3. So in DeFi, just an example, people trust stable coins like USDC, USDT. Those are those are kind of like you have to trust the underlying asset collateralization that is happening. Let's say in the treasury notes or the bank account balances, right? And then you also need to trust that all the nodes are going to be majority of the nodes are in good faith, and that's reinforced in crypto economical incentives. And you also, in most cases, you trust other people that are using DeFi. You trust brands. You might be trusting smart contract auditors, especially if you're non-technical. You probably won't go and read all smart contract code and try to understand that what actually is happening here necessarily. And that's totally fine, because that's how society is built. Like we rely on trust everywhere. So we go out, there's street lights or car, like the bus network. There's a lot of infrastructure related to trust. And then there's also trust minimization for things where we don't want to have the trust directly. And that's where immutable smart contracts or formal governance processes, or even ungovernance, minimizing human error through reducing governance. That's also one of those ways we try to reduce it indirectly. And it's more about like how we can perceive it to users and show that what's the point here, and building those bridges. So how, for example, we can show that we have this amazing system that is so-called trustless, but to take next steps and actually create more empowerment, we could actually here's the mechanism we can build trust. And I think in terms of USDC and those stable coins, they've done it in a way where they tokenize those assets, and then the assets become liquid, and then they end up in various different DeFi protocols, and that's an interesting way, because what happens there is that you do have the liquidity. So even if you trust something, there is this idea of like, oh, but I can actually get out of this position to some extent, even if things go wrong. While if this will be, let's say some sort of paper-based loan, maybe I don't have that same liquidity there. So I think we have done some very good scalable ways of adding trust with the tokenization. That could be an interesting path. But also it's quite a lot about education and being explicit about like, here's a moment where you're like crossing that border, and this is what it actually means, and these are the ideas that actually are backing, and starting from experimentations. And I think areas and regions where the financial system isn't necessarily world class, or there's different kinds of local challenges, for example inflation, or just payment networks, internet connectivity, those are the regions where you can actually get interesting experimentations done, because that's finance is a human need in some ways, even payments, but also finance. So that's where we can see empowerment, and we've seen it globally that a lot of projects are trying to build access to finance, but the kind of like a scaling component is missing, and I think some of the stablecoins have been able to achieve that.
Yeah. No, I totally, this idea of finance being a human need is one I deeply resonate with. And I think it's, obviously pertinent. And as you said, I think there was a substantial opportunity when we think about like, how do we beat inflation? How do we give people better access to credit and so on? So building that trust network and being able to continue to deploy this infrastructure, which already exists with, as you mentioned, obviously Aave's credit delegation and so on. So Safe, previously known as Gnosis Safe, is a decentralized custody protocol securing $60 billion in assets today. It is establishing a universal standard for secure custody of digital assets, data, and identity. Safe is on a mission to unlock digital ownership for everyone in Web3, including DAOs, enterprise, retail, and institutional users, both through their Safe core account abstraction infrastructure, and of course, its flagship product, the Safe Wallet, the wallet we all know and love. Start using Safe or building on top of the Safe core account abstraction stack by visiting safe.global. And now, let's get back to the show. But let's change gears completely here, and let's talk about Lens. So, I'm a Lens fan, big power user, Marcus.lens, and have found a lot of success. And I think for me, as like a creator and as someone who loves participating in Lens, what I found is, one, like really interoperable with obviously the entire crypto ecosystem, so much more so than any other social network out there. I think also the reach that one can get, and you can really target this super Web3 native audience, right? But I've certainly, as a creator, witnessed a lot of benefits of Lens. But walk me through Lens, and as you built Aave and built a really kind of impressive DeFi protocol, what all of a sudden was like, hey, you know what? I want to work on a decentralized social protocol next. How did you get to that?
It's a super interesting question because I've been building social in the past. I actually dropped out of high school to build an aggregator to connect Reddit, Dig, and Slashdot and make it a bit more exciting and curated. And also, there was a couple of hundred other people who were building the same at the same time. But for me, it was more about experimenting and building things, especially when you're at that age. But what's has been fascinating to see is that people do have this urgency to connect. And this boils down to the idea of growing up over the internet, that we make more and more connections online. We form various different kinds of forms of social capital. So we connect with people, we create audiences, we create presence, so we create profiles, identify ourselves, attach things that makes our profile signal some ways, and we create content and we share and amplify it. So we have these different kinds of social networking artifacts online over the internet. But what seems quite counterintuitive is that even though we have all this information about us and things we can do, we don't have the ownership of that. So we as people, we tend to use various different platforms, and we kind of create our own presence for the platform and for that platform to own and manage that. And we don't really have, for example, portability. So you can't, if you create an account in one platform, social media network, can't take it to another one and continue growing your audience there. So the portability lacks. And I think it's not mainly about owning your online presence, but also having control. So being able to do whatever you want to do as well. And Lens protocol is basically taking these social networking artifacts or features and putting them into a way where they're secured by decentralized technologies. So, for example, we're using the blockchain to secure your profile, your handle, how you're getting identified. And then we're using also the blockchain to, for example, secure your audience ownership, so that the followers and the audience that you create, you're able to actually then port it wherever whoever builds an application on top of the Lens protocol. So you kind of have this existing network effect, and every application brings more users. That's the kind of idea there as a flywheel. But also we use things like decentralized storage and data availability to allow users to actually create content where they can actually trust that the content doesn't disappear. So one of the issues we haven't talked about a lot in the social media space is that what if businesses like, for example, Medium goes down, what happens to the content itself? So what happens to all that creativity, articles, releases, thoughts that has been created? What happens to all of them? And we've created Momoka, which is a data scaling solution that is about data availability. So you can actually, whatever you create as content, you have availability there. And it's also very common in federated models, social networking models, where if a server goes down, let's say the owner of the server doesn't want to keep it up, the content usually disappears and the community disappears. So we're trying to solve that part. So in short, it's a different kinds of components and a stack that you can use to have a web3 social layer in your application, bringing those kind of like a ownership features to any app.
Awesome. Yeah, I
And
mean, I think.
yeah,
Oh yeah, go for it.
so one thing I wanted to say is that in terms of let's say if you're building or integrating Lens, you tend to choose things from the stack that are valuable for your use case. So the way we see is that a video use case might require some of the things. A private messaging use case might only require, let's say, on-chain profiles, maybe follower graph, but then the content is stored in a more private way in a database. So it's basically a set of tools that helps you to create better social media experiences and applications.
Yeah, I think the point around data availability and the networks we rely on is really important, not from just a censorship resistant sense. We've seen revolutions literally rise and fall on social media and
Yeah.
on Twitter and Facebook, and I think the notion that will continue to happen, right? And so continuing to have like a space where people can permissionlessly access and communicate in a way and really express this urgent need to connect, as you put it, I think is crucial. And so I think on the other side of that, and I remember when we had the Meta outage too, when everything, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, everything went down for a couple of hours a year or two ago.
Yeah.
I remember just like how I disconnected and discombobulated. Everyone was like, wait, what do you mean? I can't, like message someone on WhatsApp, and we're like sending emails to friends. And it was, as that was like to some extent, like funny example, but I remember reading a stat that like substantial amounts of capital had been lost as a consequence of like one centralized service provider going down. So creating that robust resiliency, I certainly think is really crucial. So when we think about kind of the progress on Lens and what's been going on there, like what are your reflections to date? You just celebrated your 1 year anniversary on launching Lens, and what's been going on in the Lens ecosystem? What have you seen, and what's been kind of catching your interest in the space?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it's 1 year old, so it's still a baby. But interesting part is that we launched Lens protocol without a client, so without a front end. And quite quickly, we saw a lot of clients build. I mean, Lenster is an open source client built during a hackathon, and people keep still using it. It's just so interesting. But then we have clients that are focusing on mobile experience, Butterfly, Favor, Orb, Yap, and Scully. So like, there's so many applications. It's so incredible to see also that they're starting to tailor the experiences to features to provide a bit more unique form, and also tapping into creating unique algorithms as well. I've surprised like how much you can actually do within a year on the client side, and then I'm super surprised how creators and early and power users are actively using Lens. And we know it's still very early, so I was following, for example, the Twitter community quite early because I was excited about Ruby on Rails, which was the technology back in the days behind of it. And was part of that community. But for me, what has been fascinating to see that the whole ecosystem hasn't been built fully. And we're not yet in the state where, for example, you could choose from various different algorithms which ones you want to use to aggregate and discover your content from open source algorithms. And having multiple desktop applications that you could actually choose from. So like, we're still super early, and it's fascinating to see how quickly things has been evolved. And there's also creators that are actively engaging on Lens, sharing their music. Riff has done quite incredible work on actually bringing creators into the Lens ecosystem and getting them empowered with the collect feature. So something is interesting about Lens that is different from traditional social networks is that you do have this concept of collectible NFTs that all content can actually be created as NFTs and collected, and there's different meanings and intents to collect. But what's fascinating, it builds direct monetization layer for the creators. It's not the main thing about Lens, but it's fascinating to see how much empowerment that um, actually creates. And it's fascinating because it's probably one of the first times where you create a profile and you can start actually sharing your content, and people who like it can directly support, and you can share the monetization the way you want. So I've seen a lot of creators actually splitting revenue, and I use that feature as well. So for example, if someone gave me an idea or shared some thoughts, I could actually share the revenue with those folks. And in the future, because it's a common network, so what's different about Lens as a network and other social media networks is that it's actually like a public good network. Means that everyone who is creating and producing content and helping to do so with algorithms and also the user interfaces, the clients, or even like a smart contract modules that will build for specific use cases, they all can share the revenue as well. And I think that's very valuable because that creates kind of like a social network that benefits all. And hopefully, what my vision is that now I think internet is mainly owned by businesses. So internet is very business driven. So we have this payment networks, Stripe as a business. We have Google, Facebook, all these big companies. They're big businesses, but what we want to see is that in the future, internet is more fair and equal in the sense that we have people who have ownership, the users. We have decentralized organizations that are governing these public goods, and we still have businesses, but there's a good balance in the future. So I think that's what's been super fascinating for me over the over
The
the
1 year, I
1 year.
mean, Lens is exactly. I mean, I think for me, as I mentioned, at the start and throughout this conversation, like I think, and for any creator or anyone who's interested in sort of leveraging the power of programmable smart contracts and being able to engage with the audience in this really deep and rich way, I certainly think like Lens is pioneering the way in that sense. So if you haven't yet explored the benefits of smart wallets and account abstraction, you should definitely check out Ambire Wallet. It is the wallet you wish you had when you started your crypto journey. Ambire works with all EVM chains out there, the layer 2s like Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, but also non-Ethereum ecosystems like Avalanche and Phantom. You'll never have to spend your valuable ETH again, because Ambire Wallet lets you pay for gas in stablecoins, one of the many perks of smart accounts. The web application of Ambire Wallet offers a number of fiat on-ramps for seamless conversion of fiat currency into crypto. And if you prefer self-custody with a safety net, you can recover a lost Ambire wallet using an email, address, and password, without giving the Ambire team any control over your funds. Ambire Wallet is available on both mobile and web platforms, providing a range of features including a gas-saving mechanism, effortless integration with multiple dApps, transaction batching, and more cool functionalities to enhance your digital asset management experience. Stay tuned, as an extension of Ambire Wallet is coming soon, TM, to expand its accessibility even further. Want to get your hands on the Ambire Wallet? Check it out at ambire.com. And now, let's get back to the show. Just for this last section, Stani, we talked about two really fascinating concepts like financial systems and the capacity to transact value permissionlessly. And the other one is the opportunity to connect with folks around the world permissionlessly. So where do you see these two merging? I think a lot of people have been like, there's a reason as to why the Lens and Aave came from sort of the same place, right? And so what's the vision there? What's the kind of social fi world look like for you?
I think well, the reason I think is more, I think our team is driven by the idea of innovation. So for example, if it's will not be social, as next thing. It might be something else. But we strongly felt that social has been very significant, challenge, because there's 5 billion people online, almost equal amount of social media users, and it's going to just increase over the time, and applications become social. And this boils down to the point that I think DeFi becomes more social as well. It is already kind of like a social to some extent, because let's say DeFi summer, people were sharing things what are interesting in DeFi, different yield farms, and they were participating in those. And people are now, they are minting NFTs in a very social way, where they share them in the groups, or even like worse is the meme coins.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have social elements and social engagements. What Lens wants to do more is that how we actually can add a social layer across all of these applications, and create empowerment with social proofs, for example. And I think that's where kind of like that DeFi part combines. But also, I could imagine that someone might build some sort of a way of using your social capital, the audience you have, and create different kinds of financial opportunities that way. Finance. And I just think that currently we have bigger issues in the global scale in terms of like credit. So if you travel from one country to another, you can't really passport your credit ratings necessarily in credit history, and that poses issues, especially because people travel more these days. People might change countries more often than we expect. So yeah, that's, I think, could be an interesting path. But it's been definitely like one of the most challenging problems to solve, and it just keeps rewarding all the time, because it's also like an ecosystem wide challenge, because it's not about only building a very good protocol, but also all the tooling around it. What we have with, for example, with the reach layer on Lens API, what we have with Lens SDK, and also creating a lot of design space and guidance on how people can actually create their own algorithms. We even launched a public BigQuery for Lens, where everyone can actually take the Lens data and create open, transparent algorithms for the Lens ecosystem. So, and also the experiences. So everything that is built on Lens has to pretty much be in the same expectations as any internet application. So you can't really wait more than a milliseconds to get a profile minted, or to follow someone. All that blockchain logic has to be abstracted away from the user. So it's been also like a huge design exercise as well on how to build this infrastructure correctly.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm certainly like really bullish on where social meets DeFi, and it goes back to the origins of this conversation where we were talking about these trust networks too. So really looking forward to seeing what emerges out of the Lens and Aave and kind of the wider decentralized social, decentralized finance ecosystem. So, Stani, any parting thoughts or words, advice for builders right now in the bear market, and what can you leave the audience with?
Yeah, I would just say that the best way to progress is through iteration. So produce and build anything you are excited about, create iterations, get feedback. I'm happy to give feedback if someone is building on Lens, or an Aave, or anything else, and just keep iterating until you have something that starts to look like your vision. Yeah, that's my guidance. Yeah, and something I personally would like to see is built is a governance forum on Lens. So today everyone is using discourse. I think there's a huge demand of a public town square for any community, where a DAO even can have their Lens profile, and people with Lens profile can come and actually contribute and discuss on DAO related matters. And that's exactly why Lens is good for that, because there's the data availability, there's profiles, and ability to follow. And a DAO can even have a permissionless non-custodial account. So that's something super interesting, especially if it has like a super good design, and the product is intuitive. I think that has a good market. And then if anyone needs mentoring, I can help there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's so much space to be played with. We rely so much still on these Web2 networks, right? And so being able to kind of port some of these ideas over to a much more Web3 native substrates, I think will be super crucial. So excited to see the builders there. So Stani, where can the audience connect with you and find you?
So I'm Stani.Lens, Lens ecosystem, and you can, with the same handle, you can actually DM me through many of the Lens applications through XMTP messaging protocol. So that's the place to find me.
Awesome. Well, Stani, it's been a really great conversation and enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Marcus.
All right, take care. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Odyssey, and thank you for joining us on our collective journey as we look to explore where crypto has the opportunity to drive real-world impact in the societies of tomorrow. If you haven't yet already, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and also that you've joined our Telegram community, which you'll find below. I'll see you on the next one.